The Prime Minister boldly suggested earlier this week that she is willing to be unpopular and make difficult decisions if she believes they'll ultimately boost the economy.
But do you need to be popular to get your policies across? Should we have a look back at the PMs of the past and see where they fared in popularity? Winston Churchill, perhaps unsurprisingly, fares best, with 63% of people saying he did a good job. Margaret Thatcher made choices that were both loved and loathed, and still overall, though, gets a 43% approval.
More recently, things have dipped with Tony Blair, David Cameron, Theresa May and Boris Johnson only hovering around 30% despite election wins. And Liz Truss doesn't have much room for manoeuvre. Her Tories are currently on 32% of current voting intentions. Keir Starmer's on 42%. But is there going to be a new prime ministerial Liz Truss bounce? And should we admire Liz Truss for disregarding popularity? Is it essential for a Prime Minister? That's what we'll discuss this morning.
So joining us to do this is former Culture Secretary David Mellor, who says being liked doesn't matter if you deliver for the country. Also joining us is Oscar Redrop, a special advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister, who says a PM needs popularity to help them through controversial times. Now, popularity with whom? Is it popularity with your party or popularity with the country? And is it sort of likeable fun and affability that Boris was famous for, or is it popular policies?
Boris is the one who proves that there's no point just bouncing around trying to be liked. And if you haven't got the fundamentals of your policy all sorted out. It's quite clear to me that people sometimes forget that a parliament is a 1,500 metres race. It doesn't matter where you are at the end of lap 1 or lap 2. What matters is where you are at the end of the last lap. And there's no doubt with Liz Truss, for whom, by the way, I harbour no particular affection or enthusiasm, but she's there. The point is, if she believes that fundamental changes need to be made to the management of the British economy, the sooner she gets on with it, the better. And if, by getting on with it, she makes herself unpopular in the short term, that doesn't matter. What matters is whether the policies are successful. See, when you look at Margaret Thatcher, she took a very similar line, and she had dear old Geoffrey Howe ready to absorb any amount of punishment. They took a very brave decision at the beginning of the 79 Parliament, and by the end of it, the economy looked as though it was going places, and she got the benefit of it. The tragedy, though, is if you make yourself unpopular and your policies don't work.
Well, quite. I mean, just you on that note for you, Oscar, did Boris care as much about being liked as people thought he did, or is it likeability or charisma that
I don't think chasing popularity necessarily results in it. I think it's something in a way that is unteachable. I think Boris, what he did have, and there'll be people watching watching their screens right now, shouting at the TV saying, I was certainly not one of them, but Boris did have the ability to connect, and he had actually the ability to connect with people who were not traditional Conservatives in any way, shape or form. I think during very difficult times, just to go back quickly, the two aren't mutually exclusive, delivery and being popular and having a connection. I would say that times have slightly changed from the Thatcher era in the sense that, I mean, you guys are very much part of it. You know, the media is so 24 hours a day, social media, kind of that accessibility that people want with their leaders. The game has completely changed. And I think if you just take a step back and you say, well, I'm not engaging with that whatsoever, at this stage, just to completely agree, to refer to your earlier point, in terms of it being a marathon, not a sprint, that might be OK. But when times get really tough and, you know, as we saw with the pandemic, for example, you never know what's around the corner. I think you do have to play that game a little bit.
Should we ask Ed? Because I know you've not been Prime Minister, but you've been a minister. And did you care about popularity? And who did you want to be popular with? Your party, the country? What use was it being popular?
Look, I don't think any politician likes being unpopular. If you think of George Osborne being booed at the 2012 Olympic Games when he was presenting medals, that would have been hard for him. He wouldn't have liked that.
No.
Nobody likes to be pillory, to be booed. But you also know in politics, I think, that if you make short-term decisions to try and be popular, and that goes wrong, then actually you'll pay a very, very big price. So the hard thing, as David said, is to get the timing right. If you think about John Major, Major turned out to be hugely popular, but only in the end, after he had stopped being Prime Minister. Gordon Brown is more popular than when he left the job. The challenge is to make the tough decisions and then actually see some benefit so that people say, well, actually, good call. I think that's the kind of popularity you're after.
Or rather not to be put off taking the tough decisions because you think you'll be unpopular. And, you know, to be fair to Margaret Thatcher, I was a member of her government for 9 years. She didn't care about the short-term popularity. She had a bit of luck. Things like the Falklands War gave her a boost, which she wouldn't necessarily get. And also, you see, where she was lucky was she had shock absorbers. She had Geoffrey Howe, who absorbed all of the awful abuse while sticking to a very radical line as Chancellor. And the same was true of Willie Whitelaw. You know, everyone needs a Willie, said Margaret, and Willie Whitelaw did it. I don't know who Liz Truss has got, who is load-bearing, because it seems like, you know, watching a sort of school debating society pretending to be the government.
Well, Margaret Thatcher didn't know she would be popular when she called the Falklands War. At the beginning, it was a very risky decision. That's a good example of something which turns out to be popular, but actually wasn't clear at the time.
And also, it was successful. That's what makes it popular.
And she had to do it. She had no choice.
She had no choice. Well, she felt she had no choice. There's always a choice, isn't it?
She decided that. Let the Hutchinsonians take over.
Well, that would have been the debate at the time. I mean, Ed, what do you think's going on? Because at some point we are expecting her to call election. Do you think she would go sooner rather than later? I think
if you take the point Dave and Oscar made, actually getting through to showing results in a short, you know, in 2 years is going to be quite hard. But at the moment, she'll get an early bounce from being the new Prime Minister. She's actually not making unpopular decisions. She's not going ahead with tax cuts. She's freezing energy bills. I wonder if in Downing Street they're all saying, actually, if we can do an early election and then get a mandate, it wouldn't surprise me if Liz Truss is wondering whether she might go to the country in the autumn or in the spring.
But gosh, what, this autumn?
But it's
brace ourselves.
It's so context dependent as well, because rather counterintuitively for her to come out and say I'm not chasing popularity is actually kind of it is almost chasing popularity. I think people really want serious times now, serious tone of conversation, serious upfront measures. And I think in that sense she's quite smart, and I think she's actually at this early stage has read the room quite well.
We'll have to leave it there because you're making us very unpopular with the producer, I'm afraid, because we're talking too much.
We could talk for hours about this, couldn't we?
We really could. We really could. Thank you. And I'm sure we'll come back to it.